Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. This, you know what, this is a kind of a sad one. It's also an extremely interesting one because this is giving us, well, a pretty good look into a failed live service from EA. One that really is unfortunate because of the wasted opportunity, and really, when you combine this with how they bungled up Anthem, man, it does not look good for how EA have actually been handling their live service games. So with that, let's just hop straight in. And by the way, slightly different look and feel here. This is just a different setup that helps me get some types of videos out to you guys quicker. Okay, so let's get into it. Battlefield 5 is going to have its final update in this summer, and that's going to come with the Libya map, but basically, that's going to be it. Now, you may not think this is a massive bit of news, but it actually, once you actually hop into the analysis of it, what it means for EA, and really why this stuff probably all happened, it's pretty darn interesting, because it really is no secret that Battlefield 5 has been messed up from the start, and we actually look at EA's plans, it looks even worse. So Battlefield 1 came out in 2016, and then over the next 2 years, it ended up with a total of 31 maps. Battlefield 5 came out in 2018, right? 2 years after BF1. So you would expect that 2020 would mean the next Battlefield game. That's not the case. EA actually did confirm in 2019 that they would skip a 2020 entry for the Battlefield franchise, and that the next Battlefield game would be in fiscal year 2021-2022. Now, what's interesting there is back when that happened, we sort of thought, right, okay, because Battlefield is a live service now, their plan is clearly to just keep Battlefield 5 going, through 2020, so that it's holding the fort until the next big franchise, the next big release. And that sort of would have made sense, right, with how they actually set that game up, because when you actually look at Battlefield 5 from a content perspective, you can see sort of what they were doing. It started off that game in the earliest parts of the war, right? Belgium, okay? Belgium, then you hopped into the initial sort of wave of France, but it was all pre-Dunkirk stuff. So it started off very early there, and then they gave us Greece, which is another relatively early on thing in the war, and the same goes for a lot of the African campaign that is in that game as well. And then the next place that they took us is the Pacific. Now, while Iwo Jima is obviously 1945, Wake Island is like 1941, right? It's really early on. And with how they described Tides of War from the launch of that game, the community expectation was that Battlefield 5 over Tides of War would pretty much follow the Second World War from start to finish, giving us loads of different settings and themes. So with the Pacific representing the American entry into the war, what did many people expect, right? Well, they would have expected, I think, two main things to happen. Number one, America joining the Western Front, right? There's a whole bunch of maps that could have happened there, different aspects of France as an example, so people would have expected that. And they also would have expected, Russia, a pretty major thing if you're going to be doing a World War II game. Now, with Battlefield 5, there is so much to cover, and I am going to cover the authenticity and realism, how they marketed the game, all of those things, and also some bizarre post-war propaganda that they, I think, unknowingly played into in their attempt to be very sort of politically correct, but I think in a way that's actually quite problematic because it's sort of tying into this myth of a clean German army that is really not true when you dive into the history. And it's kind of wild that they sort of whitewashed that a bit, which, I mean, as somebody who cares about history, pretty ridiculous, along with the other sort of silly things they did with history. But I'm going to start off, though, by saying this. Content is king, right? And I think regardless of any of those sort of kerfuffles, if this game had a lot of content, right, that people could enjoy, it would have done well. And yeah, there's that section of the internet, right, that just crops up and, they see, oh, a character in Apex Legends is gay and they get really angry, or, they'll do sort of similar things for Battlefield. Here's the thing I'd say, right? The market actually shows us that doesn't really matter too much, because what did Apex Legends do? Very, very well indeed. Those things did not really hold that game back. So I would contend that even though Battlefield 5, is sort of pushing towards some of those things, if the game itself had enough content and was good enough, then I don't think that, I think it would have done well. I don't think those things would have really held it back. So when a lot of people who are trying to defend Battlefield 5 are saying that it's a bunch of ist and ism people, who killed the game, right, because they couldn't handle it, I think the market actually does prove you with other, examples of other games, that stuff does not hold the games back, right? Certainly, playable female soldiers didn't hold Battlefield 1 back, didn't hold Apex back, doesn't really hold Overwatch back, doesn't hold Call of Duty back. There's no reason why it would specifically hold Battlefield back. So no, the criticisms of Battlefield and the reasons why they failed with this project, it very much is on DICE for not developing enough content and at the end of the day, failing to make a product that resonated with consumers. So to walk you through this and to really highlight how content is king, I should just go to my notes here, right? So Battlefield 1 had 10 maps on launch, but then the They Shall Not Pass expansion, that was 6 maps. Then In the Name of the Tsar, that was 6 maps again. Then Turning Tides was 4 maps, and Apocalypse was, I believe, 5 maps and then 2 air maps. But the thing is, right, what did They Shall Not Pass? What did that do? It added the French army. Then In the Name of the Tsar added the Russian army. So it added new fronts, new armies, way more stuff like that. So overall, that game had, I think, 31 maps, 10 at launch, and then 21 with the DLC. That all happened pretty much over your 2-year period, and that actually meant that if you sort of put it like this, the number of maps that you got per month, even just in a calendar year of that game's existence, like the density of new maps was pretty good. And because those maps came in big packs, yes, it had the problem of dividing the player base, obviously, but that was an exciting new event to bring Battlefield players back into the game en masse to go and experience this big new wave of maps. I think that is very different to this, like, every 3 months, every 2 months, like, dribble, right, of getting one map. Right, the drip feeding, I think, really did not help them with BF5. And to really just highlight that, if I actually just go to Battlefield 5, right, 8 base maps, so less than Battlefield 1, and it did get 12 maps after that, and then there's, of course, Firestorm, which was the Battle Royale that I don't think anyone asked for, wanted, or even plays these days, especially because DICE kind of ended up leaving a bunch of Firestorm stuff being broken for ages. So yeah, that's like a total of, 20, 21 maps. That's not great. And 2 of those actually, I think Solomon Islands has launched, but Libya has not launched. That's the summer update maps. That's like 20 maps, including one that has not launched yet. That is way less maps. And now that we know that's the end, as compared to BF1, yeah, it's way less maps, and because they were drip-fed, no exciting events. And what I really think is clear here is how they totally failed on the promise they tried to sell to people. The idea was you were tracking the war in time. So, we opened up. We got the British doing their stuff at Narvik. We got Belgium. We got the early stuff of France. The pre-Dunkirk era sort of phase of that war. We got the African front. That was all really cool to see. And then we got Greece, which I loved. Like, we hadn't really seen that in that many games before, so that was really cool. But then, once we actually moved into the summer of that year, after the Greece map came out, they really bungled up launching some of those maps. There was one where you could only play a small version of it because the big version was just not working for ages, so they totally messed that up. But, then we get the Pacific, and yes, technically the Pacific does cover up to 1945 because of Iwo Jima, but, starting off with Wake Island, right, that's 1941. So then players would be expecting, well, what else are we going to get in this game? Because they got the Japanese side, they got the Americans via the Pacific War, and based off Battlefield 1's precedent, we'd be getting new armies, new stuff as time goes on. So if it's going to be following the war forward, and certainly if we were going to be bringing Battlefield 5, which currently is about 20 maps, up to the total of about 30 maps that Battlefield 1 had, what would you expect? Well, you would probably expect 2 major content drops after this one. You would want to have one following Stalingrad, you'd want Operation Barbarossa, you'd maybe want stuff outside Moscow, then you'd probably want, like, the Russians pushing back. There's a, big, 3-year period there with a lot of different scenes and settings, very interesting, stories. So you would have expected that, which maybe would have given us the Russian side, which, Battlefield 1 had. And then you would have expected, 1944, the Americans coming over, and then the Brits, the Canadians, and just, a whole bunch, right? Many different forces, taking back Europe. You would have expected these things. Where's the Battle of the Bulge? Where's Market Garden? Key things that would have really been core to the promise of Battlefield 5. And I think the fact that they've bungled up the timeline there, that they've basically cut this off seemingly a year early from their plans, if you think back to 2019, and how them skipping a year for Battlefield when there probably should have been a release, how that really, would have only made sense if the live service had have continued through that year. It really does seem like they've decided that's it for Battlefield 5. We've got to cut it. And, there's a little bit of me that's actually thinking, they got a bunch of people back with their Pacific release, but then they did the time to kill changes. Now, those time to kill changes, the goal there was to, well, basically reduce the time to kill, and that would make the game more accessible to players who are less skilled at shooters, right? Less skilled at the twitch aspects of shooters, and maybe for them it would let the team play elements that the Battlefield 5 introduced shine a little bit more. It was pretty clear, though, that was them trying to casualize the game, trying to open it up a little bit, and I've got to wonder, were they just not happy enough with the initial Pacific numbers, so they did that time to kill change to maybe see if over the holiday period enough casual players would come back that the game's player base would be healthy enough? Of course, they then reverted a lot of that change, so it maybe tells me that did not work as well as they wanted. And then maybe it's at the stage now where they just don't see the point in continuing development for Battlefield 5. And if you think about the business model of BF5 versus BF1, I mean, hey, BF1, if you make a new map pack, you can sell that map pack to people. Or it, adds to Battlefield Premium. So it gives people a reason to get Premium. There's a very direct correlation to, we make some maps, some people buy them, we get some beans. But if you look then at Battlefield 5 where all those maps are free, which in principle could be a really good thing, well, those maps have got to earn money for the company by keeping people stuck playing the game, right? Well, wanting to play the game, and then wanting to do the cosmetics, the microtransactions. Of course, those cosmetics and microtransactions seem to be the reason why they tried to, make Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5 have like a this like weird tone where it's trying to be super hardcore, but it's also being the Expendables, just that it's the Expendables where characters die, have blood-curdling screams, and are calling out for their mother. Very odd application of tone there, DICE, but you know what I mean, right? Like, releasing a new map pack or new maps for this game, they come out for free, it's entirely relying on people using those microtransactions. Let's be real, though. The core Battlefield audience, which I think is people like me who want that authentic feeling military shooter experience, I don't think we're the type of people who buy loads of cosmetics in games in general. So it just seems like this is a really bad application of a business model that basically has meant that continued Battlefield 5 content development is just not financially viable. So yeah, in that case, it seems like they just had to cut and run and move on to the next Battlefield, which of course is pretty sad. So there you go, right? The core here. Content is king. They messed up content. Instead of prioritizing the core of Battlefield, which is conquest, which is multiplayer maps, what do? They did more single-player content that basically nobody asked for, that's actually not that good. DICE don't really do good single-player content. I don't know why they keep on wasting time trying. And then they did a whole bunch of co-op stuff for that again, nobody really wanted, nobody really asked for. And then they did Firestorm, which came out, a battle royale that people didn't really want, didn't really ask for, didn't really play that much, and then wasn't really supported that well by the developers. And of course, all that did was eat up a whole bunch of Criterion's time, where they probably could have been doing something far better for the core audience of Criterion games. Overall, an absolute disaster. Now, moving on from that, I do want to go into the sort of side story of this game's existence. And I'm going to start that off by just looking at my notes here for authenticity versus realism. I think this is a really important topic. So, Battlefield 5 ain't realistic, but realism and authenticity are totally different. And here's my example, right? Dunkirk. That's not a realistic movie, but it's authentic feeling, right? The little ships did not really have the role that Dunkirk kind of says they did. What the little ships more did was ferry troops from the sea, or from the beach even, to the larger ships. That's really what the little ships were doing a lot more. That's not really what's there in Dunkirk, but it still feels authentic, so it still works for the audience. Then there's other things, right? There wasn't blood. There would be blood in reality. Dunkirk was pretty much bombed to hell. Wasn't in the movie. And then there's things like, say, Tom Hardy, right? His glider kill. Well, he in a gliding plane, right, which is probably, your sub 200 miles an hour, not going that fast, doesn't have the engines, can't accelerate, that somehow was able to take down a diving Stuka, which can be like, 350, 400 plus miles per hour. That doesn't really make much sense. There's a bunch of things in that movie don't make that much sense, are not realistic, but the whole thing feels authentic. So it works for the audience and accomplishes its goal. Authenticity is not realism, okay? And that's why that, film ends up gelling with its audience. So when we actually move this into the context then of Battlefield 5, right, we're going to start off with Battlefield 1. it was stylized as hell. That trailer, right? Black Eyed Peas. You had guys wearing this ridiculous, armor, those sort of hero troops that they had in that game. You had these massive behemoths, like the Zeppelins and the massive, like the Char 2B. The stuff that kind of wasn't really used in that way as much in the war. It was, a bit more silly and stylized in the game, but, it was fine. It was fun. So that worked for Battlefield 1, of course. And then you look at Battlefield 5, it opened like a cheesy action movie, maybe from like a 60s, 70s one where the combat's not realistic and the whole thing is a bit absurd, right? It almost had this comedic tone, like maybe a bit of Expendables or something silly in it. We all remember that trailer. It seemed so off tone. Because if you look at the mechanical development of Battlefield 5, what happened? It all went in the opposite direction. Right? They lowered the time to kill. They added recoil to the guns that was in fixed patterns that was way more hard to play. They added the base building. They reduced your ammo count. They had a whole bunch of stuff to emphasize teamwork. Like, they made it a harder game that was more realistic. Yet, they tried to market it in this really, really bizarre, cheesy way that seemed to be... it really did seem to be them focusing on their cosmetics and all the silly things you could do for your character. Like, giving it a weird sort of, like a peg leg, a big tattoo, some silly hair, and a whole bunch of things to go out onto the battlefield with, which, for people who want an authentic feeling military shooter, doesn't really make that much sense. Come on. Imagine you're watching Dunkirk and there's some weird, customizations in the soldiers. Doesn't make that much sense. But basically, right, those stylized elements don't work in the context of a lot of what they did with the gameplay of Battlefield 5, including, your character's shot. They fall over, and they are literally screaming for their mother. You can hear, with DICE's, as always, incredible audio work, their blood, like, gurgling up in their throat. It's genuinely horrible. Like, it's really well done, and totally against how they marketed that game. So what I would say to people is, I don't think this is a big thing of people who are, ists doing a bunch of isms. I think this is far more a complete tonal mismatch and them just messing up the development of the game and making something that's totally inconsistent and therefore does not resonate with its core audience. But of course, what happened then when people voiced their criticisms of that? Well, I think DICE kind of took the piss out of the people who were criticizing them. We saw those images from the launch party of that game that was very much doing that, and they didn't seem to understand the problem at all. Look, if you, mechanically speaking, you're trying to be authentic, you're trying to be Saving Private Ryan, 1917, Dunkirk, and then you do all those inauthentic things, it's going to feel really off to people. This stuff ain't complicated. And the thing is, like, if you still want, like, women on the battlefield and, more non-white characters in the game, there are great stories to tell from reality that you can do. Look at, like, the Partisans. Call of Duty World War II. One of its best missions was, like, one of those ones. You were, like, a French partisan. She was going around doing all these things in, like, a German base. It was really cool. Told a nice little story. A great mission. And a really good example of, in a way that feels, like, really authentic, bringing those elements in and telling those stories that I do actually agree are undertold in media. So I think that's really good. What really actually did take me off, though, was the Norwegian campaign. So that is actually very much based on a real operation where a whole bunch of people died, right? Like, some real heavy stuff. And even there's, a part of that is this incredible story of basically just some Spec Ops-like stuff being done, but with, super low casualties. It's a very, very interesting story, and there's a lot of sacrifice and heroism throughout that whole thing. But what DICE actually did was they took a big section of that and they shoehorned in the character that they've shoehorned in for that they invented, did this really weird personal revenge arc story with it, and actually just wrote a bunch of people out of history, which is severely not okay in my view. I think that's a real terrible thing to do to the historical record. And, there's Patrick Soderlund saying that, he wants to be able to point to his daughter that there's, a cool character in the game that, she can have as a role model or something. What I'd say there is, Patrick, you don't need to make it up. It actually cheapens what real women did in that war by making up stories like that. The Russian snipers, the partisans. There are so many real stories that could have been told there instead of that one that would have been far more appropriate with history, and that actually, wouldn't have just been, hey, we made up a cool character and a cool story so that you can have this sort of cool uplifting thing. No, it would have actually been, these were real heroic characters from history that you can think are really cool. And hopefully after you've played this campaign, you can maybe go and you can head onto Wikipedia and start reading about those stories. But no, that's not what they decided to do. And that really is unfortunate. And I think for a lot of the audience of that game who they want this, obviously very silly feeling, but as I've said, authenticity is not realism. They want this authentic feeling military experience. And for them, they messed that stuff up with Battlefield 5. Now, if Battlefield 5 had have tonally been a little bit closer to Battlefield 1 in the multiplayer and stuff, they could have gotten away with that. But that's kind of not what they did mechanically. So if they wanted to have a lower time to kill, harder to use weapons, characters calling out for their mother, blood gurgling throats, if they wanted to do that, maybe they should have just tried to really keep it super authentic feeling. But if they wanted their customizations and their microtransactions and their more silly sort of out there tone, then maybe they should have made actually a more casual version of Battlefield 1 with a different tone, and maybe that would have worked better. Certainly, that would not be a game that I'd be as interested in, but maybe that would align better with DICE's business goals, and perhaps with the next Battlefield project, we will see if that actually happens. So yeah, there's that. Just to round this off, in terms of... look, with this game, they could have had all of those issues with realism versus authenticity and messing up their tone and, really doing wrong by history. They could have had all of that and still had a very successful product if the time to kill stuff, didn't really happen with, with Pacific, and they actually tried to respect their audience more. If they didn't have slow updates, right, and if they didn't drip feed content. Certainly, if I'm told, oh, hey, there's one map you can go and play now, and, I've waited 2 months for that, well, I'll have probably moved on to something else. And I'll probably be enjoying that something else. But if you then tell me, hey, you bought Battlefield Premium, and the good news is, bam, we have got 6 new maps for you to play with a new faction, then I, as a core Battlefield person who, remember, I want to give Electronic Arts my money in return for Battlefield content. Okay, so as a core Battlefield player, I've got to be honest with you, I'd rather pay for maps and get more maps and just buy Battlefield Premium. I'd actually rather give them money and get some content in return than with how this actually ended up turning out. Now, I know that obviously splitting the player base and stuff like that is a really bad thing. I'm not exactly sure how they could get away with that, get around that problem. But the core there is, I think they just ended up with a business model that worked for nobody, essentially. Like, they tried to apply something to Battlefield 5 when it just didn't fit. I don't think it fit the player base, and I also don't think it even fit their production capacity as a company, because clearly something was up given Battlefield 5's content issues, right? It just didn't have enough through its entire life, including launch. I mean, it even did so badly after launch. I think it was like 50% off 2 weeks after launch, which is just ridiculous for a game to be in. And then just like in terms of DICE not understanding their audience, we don't want a battle royale. There's other battle royales. It's Battlefield. People want core Battlefield content. That's what they want. Why are we putting all this time into Firestorm? Why are we putting all this time into single player content? Those resources, as a core Battlefield player, at least speaking for myself, those resources would be better spent on the reason why actually now in 2020 I would consider logging in to that game. So overall, a big mess. And then there's even things like as a part of the live service thing. And part of the reason that I didn't want to play it is they basically made it into a job, right? Where you want a new gun? Well, that's only available in this week of the live service. Look, I don't want to play a little bit of Battlefield every single day for 2 years. What I want to do is I want to every few months, maybe every 2 months, or, even once a month. I just want to have a day or two where I just get really into Battlefield and play it 5-6 hours a day. Right, I just want to be able to really immerse myself in it, work on a whole bunch of upgrades and unlocks. That doesn't really work with how they did this in terms of the rewards of their live service Tides of War stuff. And then also there's things like the time-limited game modes. This really gets me in so many games. It's like they did Outpost. I was really enjoying playing Outpost on the Greek map, and then they took it away. And I was like, okay, so I enjoyed this map in this mode. I had fun playing this game for the weekends, but yeah, they've just taken away the reason why I was playing the game. Guess I'll stop then, and that's what I did. Yeah, I think these business bigwigs need to actually sit down for a minute and think, what the hell do our audience actually want? Why do they like our franchise in the first place? Because if you look at Battlefield 5, it is pretty clear that at least the key decision makers did really not know what they were doing or where this game was supposed to go. And that to me is really sad, because I think Battlefield 5 is a better game than Battlefield 1. It's a worse product. Worst product, absolutely, worst value proposition, but the gunplay in Battlefield 5 leagues beyond Battlefield 1. There's so many things that I think are great. Like, I actually like the new, like, reviving your teammates taking a little bit longer. I like the way the ammo works. All those more hardcore-ish elements, right, that are trying to be a bit more authentic feeling, the base building. I think that's so cool. They just completely... Right, you had these game designers, and I guess map designers, who were doing excellent work, and then just everyone around them messed it up for them. I think that's basically what happened with this game. So, it's a good thing that DICE, I suppose, took 2020 off doing a core release and are maybe thinking their fundamentals more. There's two ways it could go. I think either they could double down on the core of Battlefield being what Battlefield should be, and it not being the biggest, most mass-market game ever, but just being a real good workhorse franchise that just, does its solid results every year. I'd far rather that, or, they could just really double down on it being a live service, on it being goofy with its character customizations and, that trailer that they did with Battlefield 5. So, who knows? But there you go. That's my post-mortem of Battlefield 5 as a lifelong Battlefield player. Like, I've played the original in Latin. That was like, I played the original playing Vietnam, then going into Battlefield 2, which was probably my largest Battlefield game. That in 2142, because man, the Titans were so cool. I love that stuff. But I've loved this franchise for such a long time, like much of my life, basically. So it's really sad to see it just be messed up in this way. Anyway, there you have it. That is, I guess that's us putting Battlefield to bed for a year. Let me know what you've thought if you're a Battlefield player, and with that, I'll see you next time.